The opinions expressed by the host and guests in this show are not necessarily the views of Children's Health Defense.
Well, good morning, CHD. You can say good morning, CHD.
Good morning, CHD.
It's Wednesday, March the 4th, 2026, and we're live here and right next to each other, not on a Zoom connection. We're right here live together.
Together, absolutely. I'm in Austin, Texas today. I'm actually going to run over this afternoon and film an interview for the High Wire, and I'd rather go to my favorite show instead.
Yeah, well, we're all friends together, aren't we?
We are all friends together, absolutely.
All right, well, look, so Brian's going to give us an update on the science department, and then stay tuned, everyone, because you're going to want to hear that we've got Dr. David Cartland on, and his career has been utterly destroyed in the UK, and you're going to want to hear this story. So let's just get a science update, and then we'll go straight over to Dr. Cartland. So, Brian, what's been going on in the science department?
Well, we've been extremely busy, like normal. And we've sent our senior research scientist, Dr. Karl Jablonowski, went to a federal conference. He went into the belly of the beast. It's called the American Society for Federal Healthcare Workers. And we did not know this at the time, but the conference is sponsored directly by Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline. So
fantastic couple.
Wonderful. And he actually presented a poster on the difference between autism rates in military families, military children versus civilians. And he's seen some very, very stark differences. Those military families where the parents are in active duty, one or more parents are in active duty, have a higher autism incidence, and then it goes up from there. If one of the parents has been deployed, then it goes higher, and if both parents have been deployed, then it goes even higher. So the incidences are much, much higher. We were able to look at the National Center for Health Statistics in the CDC, carries this information, and also some of the information regarding families that are on TRICARE. And he was able to elucidate this. These are all statistically significant relationships. And so we want to dive into this further. The Americans that are serving their country, they deserve better, and they deserve to know why, what exposures are there, what's happening prenatally, what's happening postnatally that are causing more children in these families to be diagnosed with autism. So that's number one.
Can I just say something on that, though? I feel terrible for the military, and we've only just started to get to know the military because of the film that we're making.
Exactly.
So not only are they completely abused with drugs and vaccinations, they have no say, they just have to take whatever, is their military food, we now find out, is contaminated with the most disgusting stuff ever. And now you're finding this.
Absolutely.
Why would you want to join the military? Just saying.
No, we want to be able to protect those individuals that are putting their life on the line. I mean, when men and women join the military, they are basically donating their bodies to the federal government. They could be killed in action. They could be killed in duty. And we need to stop treating these individuals like guinea pigs. We need to be able to protect this most precious resource.
I 100% agree. Well, thank you for that. Next.
Next, let's talk about Tylenol. Acetaminophen, paracetamol, if you live in the UK. Calpol, excuse me. And we have done some research that is absolutely dynamite. First of all, we've been able to work with Dr. William Parker at University of North Carolina. In his laboratory, he did studies on juvenile rats. Now, remember, adults can metabolize Tylenol. Adults have an alternative pathway that doesn't really kick in infants, neonates, or children. Okay, this pathway is called beta glucuronidation. Beta glucuronidation happens in adults. So Tylenol, they are able to detoxify. It does not cause neurological damage in adults. But when you look at the most vulnerable population, the neonatal and the postnatal population, this is what we're concentrating on. We found that when we increase the concentration of Tylenol, if you go to the far bar, it's over on the far right, when we increase the concentration of Tylenol exposure, then we actually form what are called adducts of Tylenol. APAP that you see on the sort of y-axis, APAP is an adduct of Tylenol. What that means is this is when Tylenol directly binds proteins in the brain, and it disrupts metabolism in the brain, and it causes direct cell damage. And that cell damage is consistent with what has been seen by the most prestigious researchers at Harvard University, consistent with the same damage seen there. And in this figure, we show that not only is there a relationship between Tylenol and the amount of Tylenol adduct that is forms in the rat brains, only in the juvenile rat brains. It does not happen in the adults. But we also show that there's a dose response curve. So if you give a lower dose of Tylenol, then a lower amount will accumulate. And if you go back to that slide really quick, then you'll see that if you do the same thing in an adult mouse brain or an adult rat brain, then you get absolutely no Tylenol because it does not accumulate in the brain. So it is very, very important that we get the word out about this, because this damage is consistent with autism. I believe that the double threat is children receiving vaccines and then going home and treating the fever, treating the aches, treating the pains, treating the malaise with Tylenol. That is the 1-2 punch.
But I mean, I can't get over that. You walk into HPV or one of these normal food stores and they're promoting Tylenol at the front of the store. They're not listening to you. They're not listening to Bobby. They're not listening to anybody.
No, they're not listening to anybody at all. And what happens is that it's given in pregnancy. The rate of autism increases in pregnancy by 75% when the pregnant woman takes Tylenol. The rate of autism increases by sixfold. That's 600% higher for children who are being treated with Tylenol. And we did a second study on this. It's very difficult to do any type of epidemiology or statistics when you're looking at something over the counter like Tylenol, because it's not written down in any doctor's medical record. So what we decided to do was we decided to look at the package insert of Tylenol and see what is it indicated for. And so it's indicated for fever. It's indicated for teething pain. It's indicated for earaches. It's indicated for chills. It's indicated for headaches. And so we went through the chart records of about 150,000 children. And what we found was that as the number of incidences where Tylenol was recommended, Tylenol was indicated, as that incidence went up, then at the same time, the incidence of autism went up. And so that was a stunning relationship. The more that there were opportunities to give those children Tylenol, the more likely that they were diagnosed with a developmental delay at first, and then finally full-blown autism. And then there's one last thing I need to talk about.
Go.
Okay. We're doing research now on the HPV vaccine, and the HPV vaccine has been on the news. It's been blowing up on social media. Individuals like Alex Berenson saying, yes, it's safe and effective. Oh, it's going to prevent cervical cancer, which, by the way, it's never been shown to prevent cervical cancer. In fact, your cervical cancer rates increase if you were previously infected with HPV before you get the Gardasil shot or the Cervarix shot. It actually increases your likelihood of getting cervical cancer. So we looked at a sampling of girls who received the Gardasil shot between ages 9 and 20. And when you look at those relationships, you'll see that Children age 10, these are girls that received the shot. This was right when it was rolled out in 2007. They're 7 times more likely to have a diagnosis of ovarian dysfunction right after receiving the vaccine. Some within months of receiving, and if not months, weeks of receiving the vaccine. Then 11-year-olds, it goes down a little bit. 12-year-olds, it goes down even lower. But they're giving this shot to boys and girls now that are 9 years old.
Terrible.
9 years old. So the possibility of ovarian dysfunction, including ovarian failure and sterility, goes up precipitously the younger you are when you receive that particular shot.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you're doing this.
Yeah.
And if people want to see visually what's it's done, the HPV Gardasil, then go to Vax2 in our movie section and go to the Gardasil section because it is horrible.
No, it's life-changing. People wonder why the fertility rates are going down in the developed world. And that's because in the name of trying to prevent cervical cancer, and we're seeing that it doesn't really prevent the incidence of cervical cancer. It will protect against the strains of HPV that are in the vaccine, but there are myriad strains of HPV that are not protected by Gardasil or Cervarix. It does not protect against, there are over 70 strains of HPV that have been associated with cervical cancer. This protects against 9. So basically, it's like trying to keep Hoover Dam from collapsing by putting your finger in a gaping hole in the dam. It just does not work, okay? And worst of all, it causes more damage. It causes many, many different issues. Not to exclude what we've presented here, which is ovarian dysfunction.
Yeah, unbelievable. I'm so glad you. So more, as you're doing more work, keep us updated. Come on and keep us updated.
Absolutely. And again, we're so proud of Carl going into the belly of the beast. He should have had a bodyguard there or something. But he said that the poster right next to him was presented by somebody from Sanofi Pasteur. He still was able to get make some good contacts and get some good relationships going with some potential partners. So even in the darkest places, there is light. There's still individuals that are like-minded with us and want to be able to see the best protection for children.
Fantastic. Well, I know you've got to go because you've got another interview. He's doing so many interviews at the moment. Very important. So keep tuned to everything he's doing. Well, you've got a My Pillow.
The My Pillow guy, not Mike Lindell himself, but there's a show called Maha with Mike. Okay. And so we're going to do a pre-recorded interview, and that should be out later this week.
Very, very exciting. Thank you for everything you do.
Thank you.
And I will see you later. So nice to be actually in person.
At the same place at the same time.
Yeah, enjoy Highwire.
All right, thank you.
All right, okay, so now let's bring on Dr. David Cartland. Good morning.
Good to, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine, all the way into the UK.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I learned quite a lot from Brian there. That's what evidence-based medicine should be.
Oh, that's quite right. Well, now, to our viewers, the reason why we've invited Dr. Cartland on is because so many of you wrote to us through different departments asking if we would have him on. So, of course, actually, we'll do whatever you tell us to do. But also, it's such a shocking story. So I'm just going to keep absolutely quiet and let you, Dr. Cartland, talk us through what happened to you in England.
Yeah, it's somewhere between a tragedy, a Shakespearean tragedy, and an Orwellian dystopian horror story. I'll go right back to the beginning. I'm a GP in Cornwall. I started the pandemic as a GP in the Midlands, which is quite a busy practice. And essentially, I believed that there was a pandemic. I used to watch the BBC. I don't anymore. I've had quite an awakening in this process. It started basically, like I said, going into work and experiencing empty offices, empty clinics. I was quite lucky in that I worked across different areas of practice. So I was an A&E GP. I was an urgent care GP. I was a conventional GP, so doing 9 till 5 appointments with acute and chronic patients. And also I did things like homeless general practice as well. So I had quite a good feel for what happens at the front door of what's called primary care in the UK. And all I can really say is that, I'd go home and flick on the TV and see a story that wasn't borne out in reality. It was empty hospitals, empty intensive care units. It was empty accident and emergency departments. And then flicking on the TV and seeing jam-packed intensive care treatments units like we're seeing now. People run off their feet with all the PPE. And it just didn't marry up to my experience. Now, at the time, that was it for me in the Midlands, really. We decided as a family to move down to Cornwall. So I got to sample the pandemic early months in 2 areas. And it continued really down into the southwest of England. I live in quite a rural area, right down at the bottom end of the country. And ironically came down for a better life, to learn to surf, to walk the coastal paths in the sand, and to do 2 or 3 days of work. Prior to this, I had a prior degree in medicine, from medicine. I did a biomedical science degree, which is quite an unusual way of getting into medicine, doing a science background degree. The gap in the middle, I did a master's as well in cardiovascular medicine, where I became a published scientist. So there was a lot of, that's not me sort of, boasting. This is just to say that I'd got a kind of scientific backbone and credentials. And up until I decided to speak out about my observations of the pandemic and its measures, let's say, in inverted commas, I had an exemplary clinical academic career. There was never a mark on my name. I'd never had a detention at school. I'd never had a telling off at a surgery, and really had got on with my career. I guess for me, the start of it for me really was seeing all the people with alleged COVID. It was just a kind of a nugget of doubt where I had plenty of time on my hands. That's the thing. I was doing quarter-filled clinics, half-filled clinics, and a lot of the spare time was kind of keeping up to date with medical practice. This is where I experienced the strange cultish dance routines that were going on in A&E departments and hospitals, and just generally not seeing the pandemic that was being portrayed on the TV. The images of which we're seeing now. This is what I was seeing and believing. So it didn't marry up, as I mentioned. We got to the point where I was kind of presenting to my colleagues, like all the people with COVID have had 2 jabs. This is where it all started for me, when the jab rollout started. We had these crazy rules, these have been discussed left, right, and centre. Very strange anti-science rules were happening. We were locking people down in the UK the day they downgraded the disease from high to low consequence infectious disease, when the rates were dropping, for example. We had silly rules, people could only accumulate in rules of 6, bubbles of 6, and you had to be meters apart, etc. It just didn't make sense, and they were trying to sell this fact that you could kill people with a deadly disease that you had no symptoms of and you had to test for to know you'd got. So there's lots of anti-science going on. But for me, it really my awakening came into the rollout of the vaccine well, I won't call it what I think it is, but it's not a vaccine by definition. We know it's certainly, as the screen says now, it's a novel mRNA-based technology that's never been used on humans. And the twist in my story is that I actually took it stupidly, idiotically. One fateful day, unfortunately, my best friend, we grew up in nappies together, and she succumbed to what I was told through the media was COVID-19. She was put on a ventilator and she passed in 2 weeks after. What I didn't know at the time was there was such a ruck of iatrogenic means caused by a doctor. These things were happening to her, and I had no idea. So I couldn't get down to the vaccine centre quick enough, in almost grief, in almost tribute to her life. And I took my wife with me as well, and we had the first jab. The second jab came when they mandated it in the UK, and they were serious about this because there were a cohort of carers in the community that were working in nursing homes, and they were sacked for refusing the vaccine.
And you took Pfizer, right? 2 Pfizers.
Yeah, the first Pfizer, I was in bed for 3 days with the most horrendous. I don't get headaches, but the most violent headaches, as if my brain was being shook. Literally, I couldn't even stand up. I was shaking around, discombobulated. The second one wasn't a planned event. They were chasing me around pretty much for 10 weeks, saying, look, if you don't have it, you're going to get sacked. And there were a couple of female colleagues at the time that were sort of crying on my shoulder as well. They were admin staff who didn't even come into contact with patients, saying, we're going to sack all 3 of you, kind of, if you don't have this jab. So, it came down to the last day or 2 days before the mandate was flipped. And I pulled my sleeve up on a bad day. I was just having a bad day at the office. The phone wouldn't stop, the door wouldn't stop. just completely battered at work. And I decided, they came in and said, we'll give you your jab now. And I rolled my sleeve up and I said, just get on with it. Just do it. No exchange of information, certainly no informed consent. And yeah, sick after the second one. The second one was a bit more of a chronic kind of deterioration with brain fog and general fatigue. It was another Pfizer. And I kind of noticed in the background my own mental powers were sort of dropping off. I had a photographic memory. It's never really come back as it was, but I have grown in age and stress over the last few years, as you'll hear from the rest of the story. But yeah, it was so I basically got on well myself, and patients started to come into the surgery to see me, and they were telling me stories of, and it wasn't me planting the seed, it was Dr. Cartland, I've had 2 jabs and I've developed X, Y, and Z. And I got variations on that day in, day out, and I was only doing 3 days a week. And it was in a little surgery in Cornwall, Penzance, with a very small population. So if I was seeing it, surely my colleagues would see it. I would knock doors and I say, look, I've seen a stroke victim, 32, with no stroke risk factors, and she had the AstraZeneca 2 weeks ago. That's really unusual. Or somebody that was young had been into the urgent care centre. You get the discharge papers, myocarditis. Started to see a flicker of myocarditis, which I'd never really seen in my career, and decided to sort of document them really and speak to colleagues and say, are you seeing this? And, looking into it in my spare time, because we were still deadly quiet at this time. I've never seen any sort of pickup in patient numbers. And nobody really wanted to know. Everyone denied it. We're not seeing what you're seeing. You're pinning everything on COVID vaccines. You're planting the seed when that simply wasn't the case. And it was deaf ears. So I tried really hard. I was very discreet to start with papers being left in coffee rooms. I would walk into the coffee room with papers to discuss our coffee breaks for 20 minutes. Saying, look, guys, this is the Journal of American Medical Association here. This is a Korean study, quite a large study of teenagers, and they're giving vaccines to them, and it's causing myocarditis. We don't want to hear your conspiracy theories, doctor, and would walk out. And that's how it went on, really. And so I tried to raise the alarm at practice manager level, a bit more up the ladder to the higher echelons of the hierarchy locally in Cornwall. Nobody wanted to know. I still to this day got slide decks unpresented with the data that I was accumulating in the very early days for these warning signals that I saw. And then it came to the fateful day when they basically rolled back the age of the vaccine into the younger and younger cohorts. And it was the turn of the 12 to 17-year-olds. And they were starting to talk about pregnant women getting the jab. So I'd really looked into this and thought, well, pregnant women, they're not allowed to have soft cheese. They have to live a very clean, healthy life. And suddenly we're going to inject them with this novel therapy. Let's see the pre-rollout safety data, to which you open the Pfizer documents and see that pregnant women were excluded from the trials. So where's the data? So by that definition, we're literally lab ratting pregnant women in the community whilst telling them it's safe and effective. It was just abhorrent. And at the same time, they're going for the teenagers. And look, I mean, in my time of COVID, I don't think I hospitalized anybody, not one single human across both areas of working in the Midlands and Cornwall. I'd spoke to a few that were a bit poorly, but they were people that had got comorbidities or were obese. So it was people that would normally pick up the respiratory seasonal bugs at the time anyway. And so we had this discussion in the coffee room. Most of the staff left. I was left with 4 seniors, 2 doctors, 2 nurses. And they agreed with me on the spot. Absolutely, there's no clinical indication for this. We shouldn't be giving this to 12 to 17-year-olds. In fact, we wouldn't vaccinate our own children. So quite the confession behind closed doors. And they said a very strange comment, and they had to pick their words carefully. They said, we won't be vaccinating any of this cohort under our roof. And pointed literally to the roof. And so the very next day, it didn't take them long to break their promise to me. They're advertising what I call the Jabatoire down the road, saying get yourself down, get your COVID-19 vaccine. If you're 12 to 17, you're eligible now, it's your turn. And they deployed all of the staff from the surgery to the said centre. And at that point, that was enough for me. I'd been watching all of this crazy anti-science going on. I was watching, all the people who'd had the 2 jabs over and over again, getting PCR tests that were positive. I did an audit showing 90% of people with COVID in a 2-week period were double vaccinated. So it really wasn't doing much for them. Even then, you were faced with it would have been a lot worse if wouldn't have had the jab. And we've seen that used across all previous vaccines as well. It's just a complete crazy cultist statement. So I resigned, and that's when the fun and games started and the trouble. So at this point in time, I've got an exemplary clinical record, academic record, and the GMC, the General Medical Council, they've never heard of me at this point. So I took to social media. I put my resignation letter onto Twitter. I created an account and resigned publicly. I put it on Facebook and all the other channels. And within a short amount of time, the trolling started, the censorship started. Instagram had a particularly nice little pop-up on my account saying, "Are you sure you want to follow this doctor? He breaches community guidelines." And obviously now they've reinstated me and the follow account has gone up. It's only going in one direction, but so yeah, took to the social media, which previously I'd avoided at all costs as a doctor. It's something that I never did. It's something you don't really get any training in, and that therein lies the trouble for me. I spoke out, and I had these really dark views. I really kept in my lane. I tried to keep it streamlined. It was very much the ethics of informed consent. We can't coerce people. We actually have to exchange a little bit of information. And actually, if people don't want something, they shouldn't have to have it. There's a valid refusal of consent if the patient's got capacity. Secondly, it was to talk about lockdowns and masks. They were just futile and all associated collateral damage with those two measures. They just simply didn't work, and they were only going to cause negative issues. And then it was as I mentioned, the pregnancy and the children. My prime position was to protect children. It was a safeguarding position. Why are we doing this? There are no 12 to 17-year-olds succumbing or being hospitalised with COVID-19. So if there's no benefit, what's the point in taking a risk? And then pregnant women. We are literally lab ratting these two cohorts. And then finally, the vaccine injuries started coming in thick and fast. And I mean, it was kind of after the booster. It was after two, there was the odd, one or two patients maybe every other day, but it really kicked off after the third jab went into the arm, and there were people coming in with all sorts of strange, cacophonies of symptoms, things that didn't make sense as a doctor. We trained as doctors to recognise patterns in symptom clusters and say, well, that sounds like MS, let's test you for that, or that sounds like, epilepsy, let's get you worked up for that and do the relevant investigations. But these were like, I'm getting these violent headaches, I'm getting a burning pain in my toe, I keep getting chest pain and breathless, and I keep collapsing and having seizures, all in the same patient. And it just didn't fit with anyone, and we didn't really know what to do with them. But rather than gaslight them like most of my colleagues did and tell them they were mentally ill, I kind of acknowledged, well, yeah, you had your jab yesterday and you've developed a stroke the next day. Well, surely the vaccine has got a role here. And you've got your colleagues telling you that it wasn't the vaccine, you can't prove it, it was long COVID. And this was what I was faced with. People who'd had a stroke the day after in their 30s, a Moderna vaccine. It wasn't the vaccine, it was this asymptomatic long COVID they were claiming. So very anti-science. So I had this kind of kickback from my profession from within. Everything I was saying was being marked down as being conspiratorial, even though I was well researched. I knew all the figures, all the government data in the UK. I looked at all the weekly reports of all the international data as well. So it wasn't like I was coming to this without any evidence base, and I was always keeping an eye on the peer-reviewed journals that were coming out at the time. So anyway, when did the trouble start? The GMC, the General Medical Council, started to receive complaints about me quite early on in my podcast career. Let's say I was speaking on various podcasts around the country and the world, getting my message out saying, look, these vaccines are not particularly safe in my opinion, and they're certainly not effective. And that actually what you're showing now, that's when it all really kicked off. I just one day impromptu pressed record on my phone. It was a day at work at a particular surgery, recorded this, and it kind of went viral very quickly. Do I regret doing that? Absolutely not, because I signed up to a profession that prides itself, or used to pride itself on the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And I've continued in that vein, whereas I've watched my colleagues do some pretty horrendous gaslighting and ignoring these poor people. But yeah, they accumulated these horrendous reports. I was getting told by the GMC every other day that I was getting another complaint, asking about what they were. And it's just, well, Dr. Cartland's spreading misinformation on Twitter, and it's going to negatively affect the public confidence in the vaccine. Sorry about the noise in the background there. Kids have just come back from school.
Oh, you're good. I can't hear anything. Keep going.
So the reports came in. I was batting them away, and to cut a long story short, I received 256 complaints by the end of being struck off. 251 of them were thrown out as unfounded and unbased and unevidenced. They managed to cobble together quite cleverly a slightly different skew on the narrative. I've watched as all my UK colleagues have been struck off, bearing in mind at this point. I was notified, I lose track of time, I think it was early 23 now. So this has been going on for some time, of the first complaint that had triggered a tribunal. and at the same time, they'd triggered 3 or 4 other cases against me. And essentially, to cut a long story short, they basically found me guilty of, as you can see there, offer to provide a COVID vaccine exemption certificate. And I was basically found guilty of harassing doctors that I'd called out. For example, there was a doctor that would be saying on a large platform, the vaccine's 100% safe in pregnancy long term. That's not good enough. That's not good enough based on what I've just said. That needs to be called out. And, my commentary on what happened with the GMC is that it was calling out doctors that were ironically spreading misinformation, misleading people with claims of 100% efficacy when it wasn't 100% efficacious in any way, and calling them out. There were interchanges with trolls at the time. I was being swarmed by these calculated, coordinated groups on mainly the X platform. I read an email from the GMC once that actually admitted that I was a target of a group of network of doctors and scientists, telling them that I was a prime target because I was spreading, quote, dangerous misinformation. But long and short of it was, harassment in the UK is a crime. If I harass anybody, I should be arrested. Unfortunately for them, I haven't been arrested, and this hasn't been tested in any criminal court. I'm not being charged with anything, yet I was found guilty at an employment tribunal of harassing, in inverted commas, 4 individuals. 3 were doctors and 1 was a practice manager. The practice manager one, for example, I just posted an email that was fully redacted. She rejected my CV and wrote me an email telling me I was a rampant anti-vaxxer and that she wasn't going to entertain the application despite the pristine CV. And I just posted it saying, if you can't get an appointment at this particular surgery, it's because they don't interview good doctors that apply. And that was cobbled into the narrative of Dr. Cartland's been harassing and inviting hate mail to this surgery. And the hate mail was actually a letter from the World Council for Health, multi-signatories, lots of doctors, and it was a letter from Mike Eden, ex-Pfizer, and it was a letter from a retired accountant saying, can I furnish you with the Pfizer documents from the trial as you're rolling this out locally in Cornwall? And she called it hate mail and it was upheld. Long story short, my side of the story was eliminated. I was found guilty despite not being allowed to use any of my 6 witnesses. They were all ruled out as inadmissible and irrelevant, no reason given. I had to rebut every one of these 5 complaints. I put through inches and inches of A4 documentation, rebutting every charge against me, rebutting it in its entirety. And I was told this is inadmissible and irrelevant as a defence bundle. You're only allowed to use kind of 20% of what you've said. So they were telling me what I could say, and they were telling me who could speak for me. That's unheard of. That's unprecedented. And then they went on to make random decisions. I mean, the way they found out about the exemptions, as they called it, vaccine exemptions, they booked an actor in to ask for a vaccine exemption to go to Canada back in November 24 when there were no international regulations. I got into a WhatsApp exchange. He pretended to be an agency rep. I offered him a consult to discuss it. I said, I don't usually charge for these things. It was an entrapment. Entrapment in the UK is not admissible in a court of law. Yet still, they found me guilty of, quote, you'll see in the press, falsifying medical documents and creating a medical record that were falsified. What I actually did in reality, Polly, was very different. People would do a PROMIC form, which in the UK was where you self-exempted for a number of reasons. And I would write a letter of support saying, as a medical professional, I support this person to self-exempt on the basis of bodily autonomy, primum non nocere, first do no harm, and refusal of consent with capacity. And that's what the letter said. Now, the GMC didn't have a copy of the letter. In fact, they didn't know a date of any of the letters, but still found me guilty. It's like the evidenceless crime, really. And anyway, that said, I was struck off. This is a career I've been training for from the day I was 5 years of age. I've got this exemplary clinical academic record. I was at university for 10 years, got 2 first-class honours degrees, never had a patient complaint. None of the GMC case had absolutely anything to do with patients, negligence, harm. And at the same time, I'm watching in the UK this torrent of doctors being let off. So we had a few incidences just to demonstrate the point. We had a doctor rape somebody, and the GMC let the person off with a short suspension because it was a one-off rape. So the GMC are obviously thinking that one-off rapes are okay, and honouring bodily autonomy is not. There was a doctor who was castrating females, removing their ovaries without consent. A guy in Blackpool, he was let off completely. We've had sex offenders practice as doctors, continue to practice as doctors. We've got criminal doctors charged with a multitude of offences, working as doctors. Doctors that have committed fraud, still working as doctors. Yet I wrote 5 letters and got into 4 internet spats. And they said, oh, it was irremediable dishonesty, even though I'd owned up to doing these letters. And they really dived on that, and it had a knock-on effect, and we'll come to that in a sec. But yeah, they basically said you're not. I think the words they used were you are. What did they say? You brought the profession into disrepute, and you've negatively affected public confidence in the profession. So much so bad was your misconduct that we're going to strike you off with immediate effect. I was erased from that moment on. At that point, I could have appealed. As you can imagine, I took to my bed, licked my wounds, was really unwell mentally. I've just had my career of 17 years, unblemished career, 10 years of training, so coming up to a 28th year of dedication to medicine, and it's taken away by the most unjust kangaroo court. That's the only thing I can call it. It wasn't like a proper court case where you hear both sides and then the judge decides. It was like, we'll just listen to what Dave Cartland said and forget what the prompting was. And a lot of the case was around retaliation to rage baiting, I think they call it. Trolls poking the bear, and they'd record the incident of the bear biting back and say, well, look at Dave Cartland, look how aggressive he is, when actually it was after a massive sustained poking of the bear. So that happened. I accepted it. The kind of plan, if I'm honest, Polly, was to hand my license back because I don't fit in this system. I can't work with these people who gaslight the injured, these people who make anti-science things up, don't keep up to date with evidence-based practice or ethics. I could never have worked with them again. So I was ready to hand my license back, but it didn't quite work out that way. I wanted to do that as a licensed doctor, have it, stick it where the sun doesn't shine. It wasn't quite like that. It was erasure. And then the media frenzy kicked in. So to anyone watching, you just need to go to Google, type in Dr. David Cartland, and you'll see there was a media frenzy. I was called dishonest, an internet pest. I was called a bully, harasser, an inciter of hatred. There was an article they wrote about me, and I'm trying to remember the headline exactly. It said, "Inside the warped mind of dodgy, struck-off Cornish GP and his homophobia." I invite anybody to read that article. Firstly, it's highly libelous because I'm not homophobic. I've got an issue around safeguarding children, around trans women in particular, biological males, and that's what I voiced publicly. A safeguarding concern as an ex-safeguarding GP. I was found guilty of showing hostility to the LGBTQ plus community. I ask anyone really to have a look at those Google searches, have a look at the NPTS Tribunal determination, and just ask as you're reading it, where's Dave Cartland's side of the story? They've eliminated all sides, all context here. Just ask yourself as you're reading, Dave Cartland said this, Dave Cartland said that. Anyway, I'm struck off. I've had a summer of licking my wounds. I had an opportunity to appeal. For the appeal itself, like I say, I wasn't really in a fit state mentally to do that. They wanted £20,000, English pounds, plus VAT, to start an appeal process. I've just been made unemployed, lost my career. And they said, if you lose the case, you pay the GMC's costs. And these barristers, they weren't just any barristers, they were the highest barrister in the country, head of the CPS London. And then there was a homicide and terrorist barrister that was the legal counsel for the GMC. So they didn't just bring in any old legal bod. And they were on £6,000 a day from their usual daily rate. So had I lost, it would have been a massive, massive chunk of money. I would have had to sell my house. I let the month elapse, thinking to myself, well, firstly, I can't afford it. Secondly, I'm not in a fit state. And thirdly, I'm speaking to the same people, really. I'm just speaking to the same ears. Big Pharma. I mean, GMC is, it invests in Big Pharma, in particular AstraZeneca and Merck, as well as other things like Nestle and Coca-Cola. Very odd, or PepsiCo, I think it might be. And so I let the month elapse, and then I thought, I'm going to fight this. I'm going to take this to judicial review. And I put a case together, some preliminary legal arguments as to why we should be able to judicial review it. I raised the funds for a crowd fund, a Give Send Go, raised the £50,000 required, and then I get a knock on the door with a legal letter. And I can't say any more than that in this particular case, but it was essentially an out-of-court settlement to pay that legal fund that I'd raised for my JR to a third-party individual. So it wiped out every penny I had to justify the wrongs of this case. So that happened. So I'm struggling at this point really to see, I can't do a judicial review, I can't appeal it. All these abuses of process have happened. How do I get my head around this? So anyway, I thought let's take a bit of time out, have some beach time, have some reading time and writing time. I wrote my books in that period. I wrote a book called Do No Harm. Ironic, eh? And then That's it. That's the book, Diaries of a Vaccinated Anti-Vaxxer. Interesting title, but
It's a
with the
great
keywords being
title. Yeah, I
do
don't know
no
how.
harm.
I don't know how they can call you an anti-vaxxer. How can they call you an anti-vaxxer? You took 2 COVID shots. That's crazy.
It's an interesting concept, isn't it? A vaccinated anti-vaxxer, but that
And where
said,
can
that's what
people
they were
get
saying.
that? Where can people get that book? Because in America here.
It's on Amazon, yeah. It's on Amazon International. There's that, and there's a poetry book. So again, during my time of recovery, I took to writing some poems. So I wrote poetry about COVID cultism. There's one called COVID Cultist, one called Keyboard Warriors, a nod to my trolls. There's one called Doctor's Despair, hence the namesake of the book. Maskaholics was a particularly good one. And it just went on. It was kind of in the middle of the night, I'd get up with insomnia, stress, and anxiety. I was having panic attacks at this point. Like, what am I going to do? They've taken my name and pulled it through the mud publicly. I mean, my local paper went bonkers. We live in a little place called Cornwall, and it's a bit like a village. Mud sticks and gossip spreads quickly.
Are you in
And
you in Penzance?
yeah, just outside of Penzance, yeah, a little village there. So the village I live in think I'm a nutter. It's just bizarre. But anyway, that said, I mean, I thought I'm going to get myself fit. I just finished my football career / soccer. I know you call it soccer in the US. And I decided, right, let's do a bit of soccer refereeing. So I got fit. I did the course and started doing refereeing fixtures. Quite a lot of them. I got into it. I was doing 4 matches a weekend on a Saturday and a Sunday. Really enjoying the fitness and the banter. And I know the game. I think ex-players make really good referees. So I was doing that as well as doing some more podcasts and getting the books out. And then one fateful day, Halloween. There's never coincidences in these stories. I was struck off for being concerned about homicide and terrorism around COVID vaccines by a homicide and terrorist barrister. This was a Halloween evening. We get a knock on the door, and it's an envelope. And can you sign for this? We thought it was trick or treaters. We opened it, and it was a letter from an organisation that used to be called the Criminal Records Bureau. What they use that is, it's kind of like if you go for a new job and you need to check that your new employee is not a criminal, a convicted killer, or a criminal of any sense, really. You get your name put on a register. And it's specifically for that. They've opened it out to something called a DBS now, so it's called Disclosure Barring Services, the slight rebrand. And the reason for that is not all criminals have been convicted when they go for jobs. And there was a case where somebody had got access to a school job and they hadn't been convicted and they were killing people. And so it's been opened out to just have people that are flagged up for misconduct. So the 2 reasons to be on the list for the DBS are twofold: a criminal conviction. You've got to have committed a crime and been found guilty by a judge and jury. Or the second reason to be on this DBS list is if you've committed a demonstrable harm to a vulnerable adult or a child. So neither of those are true. There were no children involved or vulnerable adults involved in the GMC case. You've got to remember the GMC case is an employment tribunal, and they were there purely to say, is this man fit to be a doctor? It was an in-house employment tribunal. So to pass this on to the DBS service for serious misconduct, is what they called it, was a big leap for me. I never really thought anything of it. They said, we're considering putting you on this list of criminals and people who've harmed children. We put in a defence over Christmas. It ruined Christmas 2025 because we were worried about it. And we got a barrister to write a letter. We got 10 witnesses involved in safeguarding, people who'd known me for years, people that have allowed me to look after their foster kids, etc., writing these brilliant references and a really brilliant legal argument saying, well, he's committed no crime and he's abused no one. What are you doing? This is a weaponization of this listing. Anyway, 3-4 weeks ago now, we got a knock on the door. Can you sign for this? This very letter that I've got in my hand here, it was the response. We've considered your submissions and we are placing you on the list amongst criminals and people who have harmed vulnerable adults and children. Now, the consequences of that are it bans me from working with children forever. It's an indefinite ban. I've got a right to appeal in 10 years. 10 years' time. There's an immediate appeal window. I've got 3 months. But what else is there to say other than what we've already said in the submissions? This is just not an appropriate list to be on. It's like being on a sex offenders register having not committed a sex offence. Yeah. And the reason they gave, it's quite chilling, actually. I won't read it out ad verbatim. I'll paraphrase it. Was the reason when they justified putting me on the children's list to bar me from children's work forever is because I flouted international policy and wrote vaccine exemptions, allowing my own ideology and opinions to overrule government policy and guidance at the time of a worldwide pandemic. The next paragraph's even more chilling because it makes various conjectures and suppositions about if Dr. Cartland was to work with children in the future in a regulated activity, he may repeat this offence and allow his own ideas and opinion to overrule policy and procedure. Bearing in mind, this is not law, this is policy and procedure. It's not breaking a law. And if this were to happen in a situation with child safeguarding and he allows his ideas and opinions to overrule that, it may bring a potential harm to the child, and hence we're going to put him on the list as a preemptive measure to stop him from working. I mean, there's some leap from A, going from an employment tribunal, B, to being on a list or being considered to be on a criminal list, to then actually saying, well, he may harm a kid in the future by writing a letter supporting their bodily autonomy. Bearing in mind, these were written at a time where there were no international regulations. They've been lifted. That was, 6 months previously. The US were the last to lift in. I think it was May 2024. That was the last country. And all the other countries have been lifting it in the 2022, 23. So there weren't really international rules being flouted. And bearing in mind the original crime, the GMC didn't even have a copy of the letter to be able to show and say, Dr. Cartland wrote these words. These are against all of the eligibility criteria for this country, because they didn't even know what country they were used in. In fact, they were never used anywhere. They were just kind of handbag insurance policies, never used, never added to anyone's medical records, and certainly not fulfilling the criteria of falsifying medical notes. So the final tale of woe, just to finish really, is that, I'm licking my wounds again. Suddenly I'm unemployed as a doctor, and I'm unemployable because most jobs require you to be ran through the DBS register to see if you're listed. And my name would appear for any sort of any customer-facing role, any human-facing role. It's going to have a knock-on effect. They won't let you work. In fact, there's a custodial sentence if I were to work in a role that required a DBS check. The next dagger in the heart came from the soccer refereeing. I absolutely love it. I love coaching the football for the youth teams in particular, passing my skills and knowledge of the game to them during match situations. I also, like I say, I'm heavily involved in my son's football team. All activities to do with football. I love volunteering, linesman. And suddenly I've got an email from the FA saying you're suspended for 6 months, interim suspension from all football-related activity, pending an appeal. So I've already got this judicial review for the GMC lined up. I'm already out of time for that. So they're going to have to make a special case for me to be able to get this under the eye of a judge. Secondly, I've got this DBS appeal in the background, and I'm going to be appealing it. And finally, you've got the FA saying, well, because you've been put on the criminal list, we can't have you working around children and vulnerable adults. Now, when you become a soccer referee, you enter the building and they say, look, do you want to referee youth football, anyone under 18? And you say yes or no. And if you say yes, you fill in a form, the DBS form. And that's fine. That's part of the day. You have to fill in the form, hand it in, and it goes off to be ratified that you've got no DBS marks against your name. The other group go and have a coffee and wait. The point I'm making is that you don't need a DBS clearance to be a football player. You don't need a DBS clearance to be a spectator or a referee for open age football or veterans and super vets football. So I didn't understand the ban. In fact, the ban stated that I was only allowed to take and fetch my own child to football matches. Subsequently, I've been told I'm now not allowed to take other people's children to football matches. We run a rota in the village that I live in where every third or fourth week I'll take all of the children who played for my son's team and we rotate. And these parents leave their child with me because they know I'm a nice guy, a trustworthy doctor. They kind of understand the situation around the strike off well and have trusted me. But now suddenly, if I were to take my son's friend to football, I'm breaching the suspension and face more hot water. They've spoken to me like I'm some sort of sex offender with children. There's no children involved. There's no crime committed, no conviction. I can't say that loud enough yet. Here we are, banned from all aspects of football. They told me I'm allowed to passively spectate my son's football. So he scored his first goal this week, and I raised my fist and said, well done, son, great goal. He did a big knee slide in front of me, and one of the parents tapped me on the shoulder. I think it was in jest, but said, you're actively spectating. You're not allowed to do that. You're only allowed to, they've told me, the FA, I can sit there, fold my arms, absorb the atmosphere of the game, and stay quiet. So that's very kind of them to allow me to do that. And that's the end of the story, Polly. It's a horror show, and like I said, I don't really know what the future holds. I don't know what I've done wrong, really, to this day. I don't know.
No, I know people are already saying, can you please come to America? But I mean, I know that people will help you. Somehow there'll be something. This is too horrific. And to not be able that's really the most tragic thing. They're your children and you can't get involved in their friends and stuff, and that's just awful. I'm so sorry, Dr. Cartland. I know our viewers will be just showering you in love and support. Now, how can we support you? Do you have a GoFundMe or anything like that?
There is a Give Send Go. If you just Google Give Send Go David Cartland, there is. Obviously, the balance of that, you've got to take 50,000 off because that was cleared by that legal case. So we're building up again to. I don't know how much these things cost, Polly. If I'm honest, I've never been to the High Court to reverse a GMC strike off before. I've never been to the High Court to get my DBS listing struck off or an FA suspension issued at Wembley Stadium overturned before. So I don't know what this pool of money needs to look like. I don't know if I have to sell a kidney or what. I don't know, but yeah, there's a Give Send Me. Buy my book if you can. That tells the whole sorry tale. And
I mean, Dr. Cartland, you are mixing with the darkest of the dark. There is nothing as dark as what you're up against now.
Well, I've often asked, I've asked my colleagues, the ones that were struck off, because bearing in mind before I was the last man standing, but for Asim Malhotra, he's having it now at the moment. But I watched every single week as my colleagues were being struck off in this country, and I was getting this sort of foreboding, this impending doom as it came to mine. And I'd watched as my friend Dan got struck off 2 weeks before. His offence, read it for yourself, Daniel Armstrong struck off for questioning the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccine. He was a forensic psychiatrist in the peak of his career, a family man. He's lost everything, including his family.
Well, Dr. We're out of time right now because we have to go to another story, but please do come back. Please keep in contact with us and keep us updated on what's happening to you and your family. Please give our love to your wife, your children. We support you 100%. And I know something good will come out of this. I know it's hard to understand right now, but I know that that's for sure going to be true. But please do come back on and update us as soon as you can.
No, thank you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for having me, Polly. I love CHD TV. It's been one of my places to go for sanity. So thank you, Dr.
Cartland. All right. Okay, everybody, we're going to go to our story now, and I'll see you tomorrow on Financial Rebellion.
My name is Michelle Katz.
And this is about, tell us what happened, because you trod on something. Talk us through what happened. That's what ended up getting the vaccine.
So, one morning before work in October 2013, I had stepped on a rusty nail. When I got to work, I had already bandaged it up, but my colleagues felt that it was important for safety to get a tetanus shot just in case. And knowing very little about why I should or shouldn't do that, I went ahead and I went to a little drugstore in Marina Del Rey near where I worked, and I got this shot. Within about 2 days, I got a cold, a really bad cold, and it lasted about a week. And then it would go away, and then I would get another cold, and it was worse, and that would last about, I'd say, 2 weeks. And then by the time we got to the first week in January 2014, I was almost entirely bedridden. I had severe brain fog. I was getting these massive anxiety attacks. I had developed agoraphobia. The bottoms of my feet really hurt when I got up in the morning. I could barely walk to the bathroom, and I also had to clutch the walls because I had something I know now is called POTS, and I just couldn't keep any balance. So walking wasn't really an option if it was going to be happening for more than a minute or two. So I basically spent the better part of 3 years in bed. I did see about 18 doctors in Los Angeles during those 3 years. And one doctor after another seemed to be baffled by my symptoms. I did get diagnosed with Hashimoto's. Something that stands out is that I was on no medication prior to this, and I had no health issues. I was a very busy television producer and also part-time songwriter. So I really didn't have any time for doctors, medication, or ailments. However, when this happened, all I could do was think about what was wrong with me and how to get better. And there didn't seem to be any information on the internet at the time. I Googled agoraphobia, chronic fatigue syndrome. I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. the naturopath that I finally found, I thought she was going to be able to do enough testing that I could actually see outside the box of conventional medicine, but that didn't happen either. She showed me the tests. For some reason, I had antibodies that went through the roof, over 3,000. What's normal is under
For
1
what?
or under 2. My antibodies for Hashimoto's.
To tell people what Hashimoto's is.
Hashimoto's is considered an autoimmune disease, and it is where your body attacks itself in the thyroid. So my thyroid completely tanked, and I had all the symptoms of hypothyroidism, but once she put me on medication, all my symptoms got worse. So what I thought was going to be an answer was actually another sort of layer of devastation, and I was so confused. I couldn't really get any support or any answers from friends, family, doctors. I had so many different conditions. Looking back, I also had mast cell activation. I had chronic suicidal ideation. I had dark depression. I had an unbelievably low will to live. I just couldn't get any relief. There was no moment at any time, day or night, that I could get relief from these symptoms. I also developed celiac disease, so I couldn't eat. At one point I took food allergy tests, and the test reflected that the only thing that I could absorb were cranberries and sardines. Those were actually the only 2 foods that I was able to eat. And once again,
do you mind me asking, when you say they were the only foods you could eat, what would happen if you ate a bowl of fries?
I would crumple up into a heap of tears and exhaustion, and I would have a migraine for 3 to 5 days.
So everything reacted like that?
Everything. I couldn't eat anything. I could not eat one single piece of food.
Did any doctor at any point, or has any doctor ever explained to you so you took the vaccine, this all started to happen, but what is that's making that happen?
So I guess you'd say by the grace of God, in 2016, I had been incessantly listening to podcasts because there wasn't a lot of information on the internet. I really couldn't even find anything beyond go gluten-free, which I did go gluten-free, and that did help. It helped some of my neurological symptoms. And I went dairy-free, I went paleo, then I went on to the autoimmune paleo protocol. All of these dietary changes definitely helped manage my symptoms, but the disease and the diseases, the many diseases I had, just never vanished. So I was lucky enough to hear a podcast, and I heard this functional doctrine. It was a term I'd never heard before. This was 2016. And she explained that she treats all of these different quote-unquote mysterious diseases, and she was in Austin, Texas. So I had somebody close to me help me get on a plane and get myself to Austin, Texas. Now, again, the biggest symptom was that I was cognitively failing. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't do simple math. I couldn't balance a checkbook. I couldn't really understand what people were saying when they were talking. I had to take a minute after a conversation, especially an important one, and I had to essentially sew all of the words back together in my mind so that I could personally understand what I had just heard. Often I wrote things down, but I also developed dyslexia. It was like everything connected to my brain suddenly was devastated. So I found my way to Austin, Texas. I went to a functional doctor. She took a battery of tests, and one of the tests she took was for mercury poisoning, and that had never been taken before. And she called me up when I got back to LA, and she said, I've really never seen levels this high of mercury poisoning. Like, you need to, this is why your brain is this way, and you need to get to a biological dentist and have all your fillings out and start to consider taking out your root canals and going down the road of cleaning up your teeth. So I did that. I found a biological dentist in California, and I got all of my fillings out, and within about 2 days my brain symptoms had gotten better. My cognitive health really bounced back in those couple of days. And then over the years, I got root canals extracted, and I also got cavitation surgery done. And the period of 3 years where I dealt with my teeth and got all this biological dentistry done really was life-saving to me, because I could then go back to work. My brain and my mind was functioning. But unfortunately, none of the other physical ailments really got that much better. It's been a very slow road to physical recovery, and I haven't yet achieved physical recovery.
Did they test you for aluminum as well?
Yes.
Were you high in that?
So at first I was only high in mercury, very, very high. But once I started chelating the metals, the aluminum shot up. So as I was pulling metals out of my body, other metals were being chased, which is what I understand happens. So I noticed after a while of chelating that all of a sudden my aluminum levels were through the roof. So that was another metal that was both in my body and in my brain, on levels that prevented me from functioning like a healthy adult. So that was the biggest piece. That was the first real turning point and milestone. Was 3 years after I had been bedridden by this vaccine. I suddenly found out that, yes, I do have mercury poisoning, and I need to get that mercury out of my body and out of my brain. I need to chelate these metals. I need to heal my gut. And I've gone on a very long journey. It's been 10 years now of healing my mind, my body, and my spirit.
Can you eat food more than sardines and whatever it was?
Yes. I'm still on a paleo diet because I find that still works best for me. As I was also diagnosed with chronic Lyme in 2022, because I got to the point where I had done so much. I had done so much chelating. I had did so much detoxification, and yet I was still really exhausted, and I still had balance issues, and I was still dizzy, and I still had this depression, even though my brain had healed in so many ways. So I went down the road of testing for chronic Lyme, and several doctors looked at my tests and said, well, based on your tests and your symptoms, I think it's important that you begin treatment right away. And that's what I did. So 2 years ago, I started getting treated for chronic Lyme. And I've improved about, I'd say 30% since I started getting treatment. But it certainly has not yet taken me all the way to full recovery.
Wow, what an incredible story. What's your advice to people? Because this all started from one shot that someone gave you a bit of advice about.
Mm-hmm.
What's your advice to people just listening?
Well, my advice to the people who are feeling hopeless, first of all, it can feel like the loneliest, most isolating, most hopeless situation, because chances are, even today, your situation is not understood by the very people that can help you. So my advice for you is to know for sure that you're not alone, and that there are so many more people that are grappling with the thing that you're grappling with than you even know. And connecting with those people and finding out what they do, how did they get better, what is a Rife machine, what is sound frequency, what is plant medicine, what is Reiki, what is Qigong, what kind of diet is best for me, how do I ground myself every day in the earth, how do I recalibrate my energy. These are all the components of healing the mind, body, and spirit, and I believe all three of them have to be at play in order to achieve recovery.
And vaccines, are you ever going to have another one?
I will never have another vaccine. Again, I don't really even like to drive past drugstores. I really feel uncomfortable when I'm in places where I feel like that is happening, because I feel like that is a cultural, that in and of itself is a spiritual disease. The notion that we need to inject ourselves with something to feel better. I feel like that's a very Western and deeply spiritual disease that is the true disease we need to heal ourselves of, because we are enough. Our bodies know just what to do and when to do it on their own.
Anything else you want to add or say to the people?
I just want to send my love out to the team here who is making this a priority, because unfortunately we still are invisible. We still are an invisible crowd, and we really don't always get the voice that we need. And it's so important to know that there are so many other people that make up this community. And I think one day soon we'll be able to achieve full visibility in this world. And so I just want to thank those people for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. Thank you.
This and all CHD TV programming is made possible by generous support from viewers like you. Please consider making a contribution today to keep our programming going strong. Thank you.